Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Toronto International Film Festival's Industry Conference. Thank you for joining us live at Bell Digital Talks. As a reminder, this conversation will be available tomorrow on TIFF Digital Cinema Pro for anyone who missed it today. My name is Joanna Vicente, and I'm the Executive Director and Co-Head of TIFF. I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, and our major industry supporters, Telefilm Canada and Ontario Creates. This session is co-presented by Reframe. As a female producer myself and an ambassador for Reframe, this panel is very close to my heart. You are about to hear from three amazing women who have produced some of the most successful film and television projects in recent memory and have made it their priority to promote underrepresented voices. So please enjoy Killer Instincts, Powerhouse producers propelling commercial success.
Hello, and welcome to today's session, Killer Instincts, Powerhouse Producers Propelling Commercial Success. I'm Screen International America's editor, Jeremy Kay. As Joanna said, this is a Share Her Journey session co-presented by Reframe. Screen International is delighted to be the media partner. Now, in today's session, we're going to hear from three of Hollywood's top producers about how they navigate the industry and the seismic changes facing them today. We'll chat for 45 minutes. Then we'll open the session to 10 minutes of questions from you, our audience. You can send us questions at any time during the session using the chat box in the bottom left of the screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so now we're going to meet our panelists today. First, we have Stephanie Allain, an award-winning film and television producer focused on content that humanizes underrepresented voices. She counts among her credits Dear White People and the 2020 Oscars. Stephanie, welcome.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here.
Hi. And we also have UK-born Oscar and Emmy-nominated producer Annette Howell Taylor, the founder of 51 Entertainment. Annette has produced over 25 films in the last 15 years, including A Star is Born, Captain Fantastic, The Accountant, and Blue Valentine. She most recently served as executive producer on HBO limited series I Know This Much Is True, and also produced the recent Oscar show with Stephanie. Hi, Annette.
Hi, so happy to be here. Hi, Steph.
Hey.
And also let me introduce Nina Jacobson, who founded the production company Color Force in 2007. Color Force has produced The Hunger Games and Crazy Rich Asians, as well as critically acclaimed shows such as American Crime Story and Pose. Prior to becoming a producer, Nina was president of the Walt Disney Motion Picture Group. Hi, Nina.
Hi, glad to be here.
Great to have you all. So welcome, everybody. So let's get straight into it with our chat here, and let's dive straight into something that's always been in the news recently and made news this week, which is the subject of inclusivity. And the Academy announced this week that it's bringing inclusion to the forefront of Oscar Best Picture eligibility from the year 2024. The initiative mandates a certain level of people from underrepresented groups in cast, storyline, crew, including producers, but also paid apprenticeships and executives on marketing, publicity, and distribution teams. So I think we'd love to hear how you all feel about this. It's only announced a few days ago, but Stephanie, would you like to kick off and give us your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I've been a member of the Academy for over a decade, and like Lynette and Nina, just very involved in inclusion practices. So this is sort of a natural evolution of that, and I'm excited about it. I think that I haven't been part of that committee, but I was briefed on it, and I think it's a good start.
Okay. Lynette?
I feel I was really excited and inspired. I'm a new governor this year. And so have been, sort of knew that this was coming and was part of sort of the unveiling of it the day before it went out in the announcement, and had the opportunity to talk internally with all the other governors about the initiative in general and in detail. And I think, as Steph said, I think it's an incredible start. I feel really inspired by the work that the task force did, led by Devon Franklin and Jim Giannopoulos. I think it's incredibly well thought out. And, I think that it's also, there's an opportunity for it to evolve and to grow and for people to give feedback and input. And that's why I think it, starting in 2024 makes sense, because it gives the industry a chance to catch up to it and to iron out any of the kinks with it. But I think it's an excellent start, and I feel really inspired and encouraged by the fact that the studios and distributors were consulted and talked to before the announcement went out and before it went to a vote internally, and people were enthusiastically on board with it. And I think that that's really important, that this is an industry-wide commitment, which is long overdue.
Yeah. And Nina, what do you think about it? First reactions.
I was thrilled, honestly. I felt, having been involved with Reframe from its inception, being actually on the Reframe stamp was the committee that was the one that I put the time into. And so this question of the criteria and how do you create a lot of opportunities to succeed at inclusion without limiting creative expression, right? Because you want to, I'm watching Band of Brothers with my son right now. Okay, and it's amazing, and I love it. And it's a story about men, and they're white, and so we thought about it with the, Reframe stamp, about how do you make room for any story to be told, but still be mindful of how it gets told. Like the Jean-Luc Godard quote is not to make political films, but to make films politically. And so I think that it really is a huge step in that direction, and particularly things like the paid internships, which is, such a necessary step, and it's really hard to compel corporations to demand that and pay for it. And ultimately, they are the ones that need to pay for it when it comes down to having those extra roles. And they don't break the bank, but people just don't tend to do it unless they feel incentivized to do it. And also the unions need to make room for a new generation of voices to come in as well. So I thought it was a really big step. I was also interested, and honestly haven't had a chance to read up about it. I know that Stacy Smith and the folks at Annenberg didn't feel it went far enough. And then obviously you can read from people who are terrified of it and think it does limit them in some ways. So I think that's a good sign in some ways, that there's a debate and that there's time for that debate to be had and for consideration to be given to, the nuances of it.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Thank you, all of it. Yes, and Nina, you're referring to the report that was published today, the latest one by Stacey Smith, which looked at, I think, the top 100 grossing movies at the box office last year, and I think said that of those films, 32 featured leading or co-leading characters from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups, compared to 27 the year before. And of those, 43 had a female in the lead role or co-lead role, up from 39 in 2018. But only 3 had a female lead or co-lead over the age of 45. So as you say, Stacey Smith is showing us this information, these findings, and there is more to be done. And I wanted to ask you, sort of segueing into the notion of the challenges with this, very worthwhile, of course, initiative. Nina, you've spoken in the past about the rules that you were taught as a studio executive. The rules that limited the representation on screen. For example, Black movies don't travel, men don't identify with women protagonists, queer actors can't be romantic leads. Your body of work, and indeed all of you, shows that doesn't hold water. So how did you sort of bring people on side when those rules were sort of thrown in your face, as it were, years ago?
Well, I mean, obviously you don't win every fight, but sometimes you do. And so when inside of the system, you try to have those fights as much as you can. When you're outside of the, corporate boundaries, and now as a producer can really choose what rings your bell. A great story that is compelling, that you cannot put down, will grab people, and it will attract talent. And once you have the material, sometimes it's easier for people to see it. But I would say, especially with, you sometimes need to really protect. You do have to really protect that material by choosing a home, or even not choosing a home until much later in the process, to protect both the integrity of it, and also to make sure that you go to a place that really wants it and cares about it and gets it. And so it's a dance. But ultimately, I've just ended up I don't look at the things and think, oh, I should do it because it's so inclusive. It really is just storytelling that grabs me, and I can't let go. And ultimately, those kinds of stories usually grab other people too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Stephanie, what would you say to that when you've had these obstacles?
I totally agree with Nina. I mean, that's how I've gotten so much work done, is because you put in all the time to acquire it, develop it, cast it, put your team in place. And then you really have something that you understand exactly what it is. So when you're taking it out, people see it. People have a hard time imagining things these days. So you really have to do so much of the work. And as a producer, we do all of that work without pay in order to get to a place where there's actually multiple people who want it, and then when you're selling it to somebody that they're getting what you want them to get, that you're on the same page emotionally, passionately, creatively. And that's how you're going to get to the closest version of the vision. So it's a lot of work, but it's the right work, because in the old days, you would pitch something to a studio, they'd buy it, you develop it, folks would leave, get fired, you got somebody else you have to talk to. And by the time you get to the end result, it's not even what you wanted, it's not what they want, and it's just years of development hell that doesn't actually become something. So I think what Nina's talking about is absolutely right, and the right way moving forward, which is to do all the hard work first.
Yes. And Lynette, did you want to add anything to that?
Only that I think that, it's so easy to fall back on generalizations when projects don't work. If a movie sucks and doesn't work, maybe the storytelling wasn't great. Maybe, there's a million factors, but the industry and people love to say, well, it was because it was a female lead, or it was, because of this or because of that. And, I think that those generalizations are very dangerous, but they became sort of the norm, and they became those conversations that you referred to, Jeremy, at the beginning. And there's plenty of movies featuring white male leads that also don't work at the box office, but it's never blamed on the fact that it was a white male lead. And so I think
ever hear anybody ever say,
yeah,
well, it's because a white guy directed it.
No, it's so I think
ever. In a million years, will you ever hear people blame something on a white guy? It had a white male lead. That's probably why it didn't work. You will never hear that.
You'll never hear that be said. So I think the I think part of the problem is that, if you have lots of movies don't work. Most movies don't work, actually. But if you only have one movie that's made by a woman for every 50 movies made by men, that movie that doesn't work by that woman, but there's 49 other opportunities for the men to either succeed or fail. It's been such an imbalance. So the generalizations are where it's dangerous, and it's really about opportunity. And we've been talking about this now for years. It really comes down to opportunity, and that the fact that women and underrepresented voices and people of color have to be given the same opportunity to fail that white men have been given.
Mm-hmm. And then what else happens is, if you do have a success story with a person of color or a woman, it's a one-off. It's, whoa, look what happened.
You believe it? Every time
That's right. And even though they add up, it's still not enough. They're still categorizing it as just a fluke.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's so interesting to hear. And on that note, with each of you working in the independent space and the big indie space, what have you seen happening with financing of your projects over recent years? Have you seen a greater willingness by financiers to come on board a project that focuses on underrepresented groups or underrepresented cast members? Any of you, Lynette?
I think you have to, I mean, for me personally, it really comes down to who's running those and who are the financiers and who's running those companies. And because I think independent financing tends to come from individuals or a collection of people or a company that are making movies for any variety of reason. And a lot of it is instinct, and a lot of it is just the kinds of movies that they want to see, the kinds of movies that they're drawn to, especially if it's incredibly risky. So for me, I think what has been encouraging is, every time a new female-led financier comes onto the scene, or a female of color comes onto the scene, I mean, and wants to finance movies, because then they tend to gravitate towards movies where they see themselves represented, and movies that they that appeal to them. And so I've been really lucky. We've worked with this incredible company, Shivhan's Pictures, on 2 movies, and Shivani Rawat is an amazing, she's not so new producer anymore, but incredible financier that supports female-led stories. And because again, like a lot of the films I take out, if they've got female leads, the male financiers, they're not as excited about it. And so you end up with the female-led companies. And so we need more female-led independent financiers, and you need more women in that space that want to make those kinds of movies.
Lynette, what are those 2 movies that you've made with Shivhans? Can you say?
The most recent one is this film Wander Darkly, which premiered at Sundance, and the director was Tara Mealy. And the movie prior to that was Captain Fantastic, which is not a female-led film.
Yes, and she also invested in a special for women in film that we just produced on the CW, Hire Her Back. And that was really just a special about celebrating resilience of women during the COVID crisis, and making sure that when we're out of this, that women are hired back at equal pay. And she was one of the major financiers. So, I second that. I also think that the streamers sort of opened up the world a little bit, because the studios, have become such behemoths that are seriously only looking for that huge IP. But even Netflix has changed so much in the last 10 years that they've been making product. But, I was able to get a lot of really cool, interesting, inclusive movies made when they open the doors. They've shifted more to becoming more like the studios, but still, they don't have a huge overhead to get movies out to theaters. So there's more opportunity, I think, just in general.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I want to touch on the streaming as well, and one other topical point before we go to the nuts and bolts of your career in producing. Let's just turn to the pandemic. Have any of your productions been impacted? Did you have to shut anything down or delay anything?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when March rolled around, we were like, wait, what? What's the plan? I mean, the good news is that there was a lot of opportunity to really work on development, work on the scripts. The Zoom room turned out to be okay. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's workable, it's doable. And I think a lot of things are going to be even more developed when we go into production. So there's good news too.
There's an incredible efficiency that I think that the industry is going to find coming out of this. There's a lot of systems that have just been in place, and they just kind of get grandfathered in from generation to generation, and we just all kind of accept them. And I think a lot of those systems are breaking down for the better. I actually am getting so much more done in a day because I'm not in my car driving from meeting to meeting, and now I can be on a Zoom with somebody, and it gives me personally the opportunity to be on more boards and be a part of a lot more of sort of the free work that you give back to the industry, because again, you're not factoring in that 30-minute drive to Beverly Hills and the 30-minute drive back, and like you're able to do it if it's it takes you 30 seconds to get onto your Zoom. And I think that's been really encouraging. And I think that, I mean, I had a show that ended up that didn't get shut down. It didn't happen because creatively it was really built around a world that existed pre-pandemic, and reworking that creatively was very challenging in the time frame that we had. And so that was a TV series that I was going to do, and that got pushed. But I think, as Stephanie said, I've been able to focus a lot more on development and really polish and sharpen scripts and material in a way that I'm not sure I would have done before, because it's very easy to just continue to be in production and be in production and be in production. And it's been a really liberating time in that sense. And it's not, and again, I think creativity and new ideas and new voices always get born out of these kinds of situations.
Yeah. Nina, did you want to come in on that, the whole COVID of it all?
Yeah, I mean, it was very impactful. I was in Toronto actually when, when we had to shut down production on Why the Last Man and had to fly home and, empty airports to start to shelter in place here in Los Angeles. And so that shut down in pre-production. We hadn't started shooting yet, but we had to shut down the whole operation, obviously. And then we had American Crime Story, the impeachment of William Clinton, is also was in pre-production here in LA. That shut down. Both of those now are back in pre-production, and I'm heading to Toronto on the 20th. And then we Pose, which is shooting in New York, that also shut down, and that's also about to go back up. So everything is sort of, but it has been a time of, I think, echoing both of what you guys have said, realizing that you can make really good use of video conferencing that has never just been the way we do it. It's just not been like you go to the meeting or you call, and there is a big gap between those two things. And this middle option is a good option for certain things, including some of the, a board or that kind of thing. But just the time that gets eaten up in LA driving in your car. But also, I think, just to focus on even watching new material, getting to know filmmakers. When you're in production, everything else gets crowded out, and your bandwidth is less. And so it's been a good time to take advantage of that, but it's also really feels good for things to be moving back into production again.
Yes. And Nina, you said Pose was going in New York, but now has it moved to Toronto then?
No, Pose will start again in New York.
Okay.
But with like really enormously complex measures that we're taking to be safe, right? So it's like pre and post COVID filmmaking are so different. And the differences, many of them will, I would imagine, persist afterwards. But it's a very communal, socially not distant experience to make a show or movie with people. It is a close knit in every way, shape, and form. And so it's the most foreign thing to separate in that way, and then to kind of like have to protect and do all the things you need to do. But it's completely counter to the sort of fundamental nature of production.
And one thing that I'm super excited about is shorter hours, because we're an industry who works 13, 14, sometimes 50. It's ridiculous. There's no other business that does it. And, new COVID rules of 10-hour days. Hallelujah. That is fantastic. So we're about to start back with Dear White People shooting here in LA. And, it's change is hard, but it's good. It's good because new systems have to be put in place and new great ideas spring from it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, change is good. Lynette, you said this brings efficiencies inevitably. Things are changing. So can you give us, you referred to a couple of productions that are starting back up again. Can you give us a snapshot of what's happening with producing in the US? I mean, we've heard of a few. Are you encouraged by what you're seeing? And just what's it like now, the producing situation here?
I mean, we're in pre-production here, and it is meticulous. It's you're having to think about every point of contact. Like say, this is just, filmmaking is inherently about a ton of contact, interpersonal contact, every part of it, building things, designing things, making, hair and makeup, so intimate. The way a camera crew works, the way, the proximity is just, it's all about proximity. So it's about separating people. It's about limiting hours, limiting, the amount of people who can be inside at any given time.
Making time for cleaning, separating the makeup trailer, which is sort of the fun place where you can hang out with your actors and your actors get done. Nope. Everybody's got to be in there one at a time. I know actors who are doing their own makeup now just because they're just not comfortable, even going into the makeup trailer. So there's a lot. Zoom read-throughs. We're doing all our read-throughs on Zoom because, why go sit in the room with everybody?
And so all of us who are working, if you go to the lot for our, in the American Crime Story impeachment, it shoots at the Fox lot. So you get tested weekly. You have masks of a certain caliber that are mandated, and and it's still a ghost. It's still like a ghost town there. Most people are remotely.
And I heard some people are doing pods. Oh, sorry.
The place where I think it's going to impact a lot of people. I mean, I think about parents, and I think about, even myself. Like I did a television show last year in upstate New York, and I had 2 kids that were back in LA, and I had my baby with me on location, and I flew back and forth almost every week. And that's not something that you could do right now, or I wouldn't feel comfortable doing. And I think that it's already challenging enough for women and mothers in the industry, and then you add this into it. And I do think a lot about show that's going to go shoot in Vancouver, and I have young children. Like, what do I do? Am I just not seeing them for 4 months? Am I, it sort of already adds it's already complicated and hard enough to be a working mother in the industry, but then you add into travel restrictions and quarantine and where things are shooting, and again, that sort of comes back to we're in this time where we're really trying to encourage more women in the industry. In addition, and I think it's a simultaneous track to underrepresented voices, but a lot, if and obviously not all women are the primary caregiver to their children, but I think that's been one of the major issues for female directors specifically, has been, when they get to a certain place in their career, that's when they're also having babies, and then it's challenging. So again, you add in the COVID factor, and the inability to travel, and the ability then having to quarantine. There are barriers that I think we're going to see a hit on the progress that we've been trying to make, that I'm not sure we're really talking about that much, and I think is going to be a real factor.
I think that's very thoughtful. I know, on Why the Last Man, we have a lot of moms. It's a show in which, an event occurs in which all mammals with the Y chromosome drop dead, with the exception of one kind of like really hard to understand why he would be the one who's alive guy. And then the whole cast is women, obviously. So we've been super mindful.
Can't wait for that.
So, so we have a lot of moms, and it's a big deal. So if you have, people are bringing families with them, and I always go back and forth as a producer. Directors often can't really go back and forth anyway, but I always go back and forth. So it's a huge thing about figuring that out. And, same for our fellow producers, directors. Our director had to ask her family, like, hey, how do you feel about me going to go do this? And so it is.
I think it impacts the pipeline of women, but I think look, the truth is it's going to impact men as well, because the reality is and I have a friend of mine who just moved to Vancouver, and his family is in LA, and their kids are school. And normally he would fly back and forth at weekends. And I know lots of couples that do that. Like, the partner goes away and the kids stay, and then they fly back and forth. And if you take away the ability to do that, and there's quarantine, it's really tough on families. It's going to be really tough on families. It just is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many ramifications from this, but I want to move on and just briefly touch on another fundamental aspect of the business, which is streaming and the rise of streaming. Platforms have been springing up recently. I just wanted to get a sense from you about how you approach what you do now, given that you have other options. Just talk us through those choices when you have a movie, say, that's available as an acquisition title. And you're thinking about, does it go the theatrical route or does it go the streaming route? What's going through your mind there? Annette, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure. I think for me, the new world of streaming has just given more option and opportunity, especially for independent filmmakers. There's just more buyers, and it's incredibly expensive to mount a theatrical campaign. And so a lot of the early movies I made, I just wanted to get 1 or 2 theaters in LA and New York, and you're sort of so desperate for that to happen. And now I feel like some of those movies that I had made, early on in my career, now they would have a much wider audience available to them because of, all the streamers. And so for me, I think it's incredibly exciting for independent films specifically. And I think but in terms of the approach of who do you choose? If you're lucky enough to be in that situation, that's great. It really comes down to who's the most passionate and who has the best plan. And it's so individualized. For me, it always is about people. I want to know who understands the movie that we made, who gets it, who sees it the same way, who feels like they have the audience for it. We end up in very detailed conversations when you're selling a movie at a festival or before a festival with distributors to really get into the nuts and bolts of who are the people I'm going to be dealing with every day, and are they passionate? Because the person that cuts your trailer or is overseeing your trailer or puts your poster together, if they don't understand what your movie's about, that's hours of stress and combative relationships that is problematic. And so the process of figuring out who's the right distributor to me is exactly the same. It's who understands the movie, who cares, who's got the most exciting plan. And because now, look, I think some movies you still really want to see them in a theater, and that's incredible. And that factors in. It's one of the factors. It's not the only factor, I think. Whereas I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was definitely the dominant factor. Now I think it's just one of the factors. It's definitely not the dominant factor anymore.
Okay.
I mean, for me, what's so fantastic is, this untrue adage that Black films don't travel is just completely out of the window with streaming, because I made a little tiny movie for Netflix called Juanita, and it's a huge hit in Brazil. It would never have gotten to Brazil, Right. And what's great about that is we are building movie stars around the world of all kinds now. It's not just your white male lead or your 2 or 3 white ladies who are fantastic actors who have that opportunity. And it's about the eyeballs. There's so many more people can see your movies when it's on a platform than will ever go to a theater. So I have embraced the streamers with love and affection, and I'm just so happy that they're making a difference in the kinds of movies that I make.
We had an experience, our first experience actually for us of making a movie for Netflix, our first streaming experience, which was Joe Robert Cole's movie. And Joe it's his directorial debut. He's a really wildly talented writer who had worked with us on People vs. OJ, and also co-wrote Black Panther, and who we've had a long relationship with. And he wanted us to produce the movie that he directed, and we really just wanted to make sure to protect his voice. That was the whole point of doing it, was about his voice. And the experience of we had some tough bumps in the road, even early going into production, that could have really been destabilizing at a studio. But because their investment also was in the talent, and their investment was in Joe, the degree of support was it was a movie under $10 million, but I felt like we had an incredible amount of support and not kind of a penny pinching attitude within our box. We had to stay in our box, but the mindset was always about the really the filmmaker's voice, and that was a great experience. And then the number of people who saw it blew my mind. It blew my mind. As a person who's grown up in theatrical, it's unimaginable that you could reach that many people in that many places with a movie of that scale.
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
and what it takes to do it is so hard. At the same time, I think, that the theatrical space is also a really critical space of where we gather together, not in our little bubbles, where we are not socially distant. And that's an important part of what I certainly care deeply about keeping that that alive, but it's for filmmakers, I think the opportunities and the chance to discover new voices and to have these other kinds of buyers is a huge win for producers, certainly. For us, that's a huge win.
And it's not, I mean, I'm producing an 8-part series now for Zoom, where it happens, where 100,000 people tried to get in to see our live show of Golden Girls the other night. 100,000 people. It's just incredible that you can get that kind of, engagement with people without any advertising, with no advertising. That's pretty amazing.
I mean, then there's also I would say the downside is that you can also get lost in the shuffle. That can happen anywhere, but I think that speaks to the stuff that we've talked about, which is actually how do you protect against being lost in the shuffle, which means ideally getting to really know who will be launching your film and whether they have as big of ambitions as you do.
Yes. Stephanie, what's the show you're producing for Zoom?
Well, it's actually in conjunction with Zoom. It's called the Zoom Where It Happens, and it's a collective of Black women creatives who have come together basically to create fun entertainment during the quarantine, during the pandemic, with also civic-minded underpinning. So basically, we're giving information out on the census and how to fill it out, or, how to be a poll worker, or how to, how to work at the polls, not to be a poll worker, but how to, the dates for voter registration and mailing registration. So it's entertainment, but it's also civic engagement and just trying to engage people in our democracy so that, everybody goes out and votes and participates.
Terrific. Well, we wish you the best of luck with that. Now, you've all spoken about, streaming giving you so many more options, and of course, crucially, the ability to reach audiences around the world. Does this change the type of movies you're making now, the kind of movies you might consider making, knowing that you could reach a country or an audience?
Funny, because I'm attracted to what I'm attracted to. I wish I could push myself in the lane, but I can't. It's just, I think Nina said it great at the beginning. It's stories that engage you. I can tell when I'm really into something if my heart starts beating fast. It's really kind of that simple. And I'm a Black woman, so I'm interested in stories that represent me and represent my friends and the people I know, and so it's just really as simple as that, And
I think it's also, you work on this, as like Stephanie said earlier in the conversation, as a producer, you tend to work on stuff for so long without getting any compensation and no guarantee that it's ever going to happen. So you have to want to get up every day and be excited to work on it and be passionate about working on it, because otherwise you're just never going to motivate. It's just going to sit on your slate, and every week you're going to be like, oh God, I have to make a phone call on that thing. So I think it doesn't change, it doesn't change that. And I also think, we're all creative producers. We're not just like physical producers who know how to put something together. So there is an element of when I work on something, I want to feel like my voice has validity, and that I'm not just moving pieces around, that if I make a suggestion or if I have creative input, which is all the time across the board on absolutely everything, that I'm coming from a place of experience, or I'm coming from a place of wisdom or knowledge or anything. And so as Steph said, then you tend to be drawn towards things that you're familiar with. And, but then I also think it's for me in terms of, especially being a white woman and really wanting to work with underrepresented voices that are not just white females, it then becomes important to really seek out women, for me, women of color who I can fully believe in and get behind and support, even if that experience isn't my experience, that then you become an enabler. And I still feel like producers at their core are enablers, and they're enablers of filmmakers and enablers of artists. And so, I think that that's also something that I've always wanted to do in general, is really enable artists and enable filmmakers and enable directors and get behind their vision. And so that's no different. And for me, it's sort of about the balance of the two, the balance of me feeling like I can really creatively contribute from a place of experience, and then also just fully supporting somebody else's vision.
Yeah. Nina, did you want to come in on that? Talk about the passion that drives you and the projects you champion?
Yeah, I think it's really the same thing, which is it's an inside out process. So you don't really think like, oh, let me find something for streamer. I definitely think that like I have a desire to find movies that could really connect on streaming because I've had a positive experience with it. So I'm definitely like positively motivated, but I still have to find the thing that like, makes me sit up straight in my chair and go and not want anybody to bother me while I'm reading it, and that I want to live with for that long. As echoing what everybody has said, it just takes, it's like a rocket, to get a movie made, and it takes a lot of rocket fuel. And for a long time, it's just really you or your company that is the fuel, and you have to be able to last a long time. And otherwise, it's also opportunity cost. So you still tend to focus just on those things that are undeniable for you. And hopefully.
And I just want to shout out, because I've known Nina for 30 years, and Lynette and I fell in love on the Oscars. And these two ladies really put their money and their effort and their passion where their mouth is. I mean, they have supported so many different artists and just across the board. I love you guys. You're the best.
We love you too.
Yeah, right back at you.
So you've all segued beautifully into this conversation now, pre-production and production, and how you assemble your project. So let me ask you this: you've all done adaptations. You've adapted prior existing material. How do you find the right writer and the right director to help you tell this story on the screen? Lynette?
I think it's education, consumption of work. You have to read a lot of scripts. You have to watch a lot of movies to I think, first of all, feel like you can find somebody whose sensibility is aligned. But then it's trial and error of who wants to do this. I mean, it's often I've done a lot of work in the early part of my career with writer-directors who self-generated, and then they brought me a script. And what was so hard about the job was trying to get their movies made, especially if they were first-time filmmakers. That's hard. I think what's equally as challenging when you're auteur-driven as a producer, you sort of really want to work with auteurs or like very sort of clear visionaries, either as writers or directors, is pairing people with something that they are passionate about, that you share the vision with. And you also have to be willing to be adaptable. I think you can fall in love with a book, but then if you bring on a writer and then they have a take, it's not going to be the same take as you to the letter. It just isn't. And so there's an adaptability of, can I get on board with what they're passionate about? Does it align enough? And if I'm going to go down the road with this writer, is there going to be harmony with us? And then again, when you bring the director into that process, it's a sort of another level of the same idea. And so that, that process is a process of trial and error. And then it's really about communication. It's about matching of personality. And again, it's all about the story is queen, like the story rules and the project rules. And is everybody making the same? Is everybody out for the same end goal? And I think that's it's a real it's a real knack as a producer. I think it's a real knack to be able to put those projects together. And sometimes it takes years. I mean, it took me 6 years to get the director for The Accountant, and And then I optioned a book, and it took me a month to find the right writer, and she delivered an incredible adaptation. So sometimes it takes forever, and it really is about a meeting of creative minds.
Yeah. And, we're going to go to audience questions in a couple of minutes, but I just want to ask each of you something. Stephanie, you've spoken about how critical it is to protect artists from studio interference. And I imagine that's even more challenging when the artist is from a community that's underrepresented or the studio might not fully understand. How do you do that? How do you protect the artist while keeping the studio happy?
How do I do that? I mean, I think one thing that Lynette just said is super duper important, which is when you're finding an artist, especially a writer director who is an auteur, who has a vision, I just try to get inside that vision and make every choice that we make together moving forward, just make sure that it is in alignment, like if you, even a DP, any kind of person that comes into the circle, you have to have that moment where that they have the same, that they're in service of, as my friend Steven Soderbergh says, you're in service of what the material is, It's not the ego. It's not like sometimes you have to say harsh things. Sometimes you have to, have people back down a little bit in service of it being the vision, the project that you're trying to give birth to. And I think that's really what it is. It's just really protecting that vision. And then the interference that comes is just, you're trying to do right by that. That makes the studio happy because you're making sure that the thing isn't corrupted by, something that has nothing to do with the process. So that's a crazy winded way, but that's kind of what I do.
No, absolutely. Nina, could you come in on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having been a studio executive for a long time, I don't tend to, I actually think that if you've chosen the right home at the right time, like referring back to the things we spoke about earlier, hopefully you're all sort of pulling together, and if you are, and ideally what you get from your partner, your studio partner, is a perspective that at a certain point you lose because you're in it and you're in the bubble with your filmmaker. Like that's where you want to be, is like in the center of the fire with them. And so the person who can look down from, whatever the crow's nest and you're down on the deck might sometimes see things you're not seeing. And ideally they're focused on that level and they let you take care of the rest of it. And if you get to a point where there's, a push and pull, so be it. Then, you try to sort of stand in front of your filmmaker when things go wrong. And, behind him, when things go right, or her, and beside her, as, hopefully as much as possible.
Yeah. So thank you for that. We're going to go to audience questions. I'm going to direct them to each of you specifically, just to get through a few. We've got one here from Lydia Korotko. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Lydia says, for an up-and-coming, not represented writer-director with a killer, racially inclusive, female of color-driven script, what are my first steps to acquiring funding? Do I attach a producer first? Do I pitch it to production companies? What should I do? Stephanie?
You always attach a producer first. But, if you have a script, I think, Franklin Leonard's Blacklist is an amazing place to put your script up. And if it's that good, it will rise through the ranks through readers giving it good coverage. And everybody reads those, the top scripts that come through there. So I would say that's probably the first thing you want to do, because it's hard to attach a seasoned producer unless there's an element, unless they're represented, unless they've won all these prizes, there's just too much material out there. So I would just say go to Franklin's Blacklist and see how good the script really is.
Okay, thank you. I've got one for you here, Nina, from Stefan Hogan, who says, do you find that talent agents who are instinctually risk-averse are more helpful these days about bringing inclusive projects to their clients?
I don't. By the way, I'm not sure that all talent agents are inherently risk averse, but yes, I think that there is. I mean, if anything, I think right now, certainly, especially with directors and writers, right now there is almost, the demand for voices who are women, who are people of color, is really very high right now in the television space, especially. And so I think that the agencies are well aware of that. They are well aware of that demand, and so I do think that agents do go where they think there's upside, and there is a lot of upside in a much more inclusive. That conversation is a much more inclusive one than it used to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. Lynette, here's one for you. You spoke about shuttling the children back and forth. Emily Brown asks, speaking of kids, how's this impacting on hiring child actors? Is it any different from the rest of the COVID-19 hiring or shooting protocols?
It's a fantastic question that I actually can't answer because I haven't had to deal with it. So I can imagine it. It's actually probably falls under all the same restrictions as depending on where you're shooting and depending on where the children are coming from and depending on what the rules and regulations are of that particular state or that particular country. But it's not something that I've dealt with. I haven't shot anything since we've been in lockdown, and so I haven't particularly dealt with it. But that would be my assumption. I'm not sure if Nina or Stephanie have been working with it.
In the thick of it. There are ways for people to bring their families. Certainly if you have young children, dependent children, and you have the work visa, that's, I know people who are bringing their families. Like I say, I'm not, I have to go, I'll come back at Thanksgiving, but it'll be the longest time I've had to be away. And, it wasn't easy to commute to, Kuala Lumpur either. So I was there for good stretches of time on Movie Crazy Rich Asians, but for actors, it'll be the same thing, which is, young kids probably doable, and older kids, I think, maybe, and spouses, I guess, people are getting it done in different ways, whether it's work visas or whatnot, but I think there would be the same rules. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And then I have another couple here. One from Barbara Lee says, hi, this is Barbara from the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. When you find stories from underrepresented women of color, would you consider connecting with smaller festivals that champion these artists and know how to access these people, perhaps like you do? Are you looking at these festivals perhaps that address certain ethnicities or sections of society that might have a lot of information about talent emerging in those fields? Is that a good source for you? A good way of contact building? Lynette, you're nodding your head. Would that be a good way?
Well, I mean, I guess the question is are you talking about, is the question related to after you've made a movie or prior to making a movie? I mean, I made a movie that was directed by Andrew Okpehar McLean called On the Ice, which was an entirely native cast 10 years ago. And when that movie came out, it went to Sundance and Berlin, but then outside of those two festivals, we were very targeted in terms of how to reach audiences that would specifically respond to that film about that community. And it was a contemporary story. It wasn't a historical piece. And so I do feel like smaller festivals that really know and target audiences for those movies, like 100%. In terms of beforehand, just in terms of like looking, I mean, I have my staff looking at movies from everywhere, all over, to find new voices. I mean, that's one of the main things that they do, is like just watch content and like sourcing that content from everywhere. And festivals are absolutely for me, have always been the primary place to find underrepresented voices and new and exciting talent.
And the Reframe Rise program, we should just shout out, because we have identified amazing, talented ladies who are mid-career, and it's just a great opportunity to find new voices there as well.
That's actually a really good point, Steph. Is I think that there's a lot of women and underrepresented voices who have made movies and are experienced, but then weren't given the opportunity because of the landscape many years ago to sort of go from their incredible independent film that did great at a festival to then progress to the next level. And there is a ton of those directors out there that Reframe and we specifically have been working with to help reintroduce back into the industry. If it doesn't have to just be the sort of the young up and coming talent with their new first film, there's a lot of established directors that weren't given an opportunity because of the way that the industry has worked for so long, that are just as deserving, qualified, capable, and talented as some of the newcomers coming into the space. And that's definitely something that Reframe has had a major focus on.
Well, I think we also hope that, movie goers, movie lovers, and people, consumers of content, become part of the conversation by sort of seeking out things like the Reframe stamp, that says like that the effort is there and the results are there, that inclusive filmmaking can happen, certainly when it comes to women and people of color, like to pay attention to the people, to those voices as consumers as well. And I think that, a lot of this is a collective effort, and certainly I think the virtual film festivals also open a lot of doors for a lot of people.
Thank you for your questions. Look, we are out of time, and I think we could speak for much longer, but it's been fascinating hearing each of you talk. Thank you. Thank you for participating. We wish you all the best with your upcoming projects and the rest of your illustrious careers. Thank you to TIFF, to Reframe for this panel, and we'll see you the next one. And meanwhile, everybody, goodbye, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.